Well, we're glad that you all are here. Thanks for joining us today for the webinar. My name is Caleb Smith, I'm the Director of Residency and Coaching for Converge. And this is our second webinar as we are pursuing Converge Residencies and implementing residencies movement-wide through the local churches. And we're going to be spending some time today answering the questions of how and what. Our last webinar that we had back in October focused on the why. And if you're in need of viewing that webinar or the slides that go along with it, you can find that on the Converge website. I believe it's converge.org/webinars. There's an S at the end of that. But you can find those links there. You could also email me. Hopefully for most of you, you've gotten an email from me sometime in the past couple of weeks, and some of those links should have been in those emails. But again, if you need them, just be in touch. We'd love to get you all the information that we can on those things. So we want to go ahead and get going. It's 2:00. I want to respect y'all's time. For those of you who have joined us at this moment, some of you have been in touch, said you've got to jump off before we actually finish today. That is not a problem. If something comes up and you've got to step away, appreciate you just registering, really, because we'll send out an email as soon as we're done. Well, maybe not as soon as we're done, but later today, an email with a link to today's video and to the slides so that you can get all that information. I also mentioned that so that as we walk through these slides, don't feel like you've got to furiously be taking notes or anything like that. It can just be an opportunity for you to sit, listen, let the information kind of soak in, and then as you get the link for the slides later, you can go back and take a look at those notes. But as we get going, I'd love to pray for our time and my communication ability for this afternoon. So would you join me in prayer real quick? Father, thank you so much for this afternoon, for this opportunity to connect in this way with these churches and with these church leaders. Thank you for how you are working in their lives in discipleship, how you're working in my life in discipleship. And we pray for the future of the church. We know that it is well in your hands, but we want to be found faithful and faithful to the task that you have given us. So help us as we prepare well, as we launch people well into ministry. And may residencies be a place where future church leaders are encouraged, are strengthened, and are sent well to the body. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. All right. Well, we're going to get to it. I feel like there was something else I wanted to mention. I'm not. Oh, yes. It was actually question and answers. So towards the end of our time, about the last 15 minutes or so, will be an opportunity for me to answer some of your questions. You should see an option within the Zoom platform that you are in, whether it's through a mobile device or a laptop or computer or desktop, that there's a place for you to be able to type in a question. You can go ahead and type those in throughout the presentation, and then I will do my best to answer as many of those as possible over the last 15 minutes or so. And there will be more instruction if your question doesn't get answered. There'll be more instruction about how we can connect so that your questions can be answered fully. So please do that as we move through. All right, I've got you can't see it, but I've got like two screens in front of me that I'm just making sure I've got settled here. So that's kind of what I'm going back and forth looking at here. Well, let's go ahead and jump in. A little bit of a review from last time, just to catch folks up who maybe haven't been able to watch the first video yet or weren't a part of that webinar. When we're talking about Converge Residencies, first couple of things. One is what the mission is of Converge Residencies, and that is that we want to educate, equip, and send effective leaders into vocational ministry. Educate, equip, and send effective leaders into vocational ministry. And we say this specifically because there's a difference for us when we talk about residencies. There's a difference between the terms internship and residency. When we talk about internships, We're talking about assisting someone in determining a call. Internships are things that are a little bit like you kind of get to be a shadow of someone, getting to see kind of what happens behind the scenes, and just getting to walk behind them as they are in their daily ministry life. But a residency is a place that clarifies a call to ministry. It's someone who believes that they've been called to ministry, but the residency becomes a place where that call is clarified. What is it that God is launching them into in the next season of ministry and of leadership? And the analogy or metaphor, I never know which of those terms to use correctly within English literature, but the word picture that we use with that is even when it comes to medical residencies. Doctors go and they go and they have a residency for a few years in a place, and they're able to begin to put into practice the things that they've been studying for years and years and years. And that's really what we are wanting to provide. It's in that same mindset. The local church becomes a place where we want people who believe that they're called to ministry to be able to go to put into practice things that they may have been learning, and even the things that God has placed on their heart and passion. And then for those of us who lead in the local church, that we can help them in the clarifying of that call to ministry. So there were a few things that we touched base on during our last time together. The landscape of pastoral and leadership development is shifting. It is moving more into the experiential side of training. It's not that the educational components are being devalued. It's that the experiential components value has been raised up to that same level. So as much as we want someone to be educated and trained and to do the correct studies, we also want them to have the experiences that go along with leading well, with experiencing even the frustrations and maybe even some failures in ministry that prepares them well for the marathon of their vocational ministry career. We also talked about that we believe residencies are the best avenue for ministry preparation because it happens within the local church, because it becomes an activity that the body of Christ joins in with in a local setting. Where the resident is able to understand better culture and context and the implementation of church leadership in those settings. And then the third thing that we touched on finally is that we are starting a Converge Residency initiative. And the past 2 months have been really great on connecting with many of you. Some of you have already begun to fill out our application for being a church host for a residency. Some of you have just engaged in the conversation to want to learn more about it. So today becomes a lot of that nuts and bolts conversation. So as we step forward into our topics for today, please know I am fully aware that today may be a little bit like drinking from the fire hydrant. There's going to be a lot of details that we'll be going over. But again, please just allow for this to just settle and allow for it to be a moment to just take in the information and process it afterwards. So our topics for today. First, we're going to talk about the what. The what are the vocational, the experiential, and the educational components. Secondly, in the how, we'll talk about the champion, who the champion is, or another definition for that would be who is hosting the residency in your church. But we are calling them champions. The application and hiring process, and then the support raising aspect of this. And then third is the church readiness. How ready is your church? What path are you all along? What path has the Lord been leading you on in being prepared for launching into a residency program with effectiveness? So the first is vocational training. The scope for this begins on July 15th of this coming summer. And we're talking about it within a one-year thing in terms of the vocational training, because our idea is, and the thing that we are strongly recommending is that though we would recommend a 2-year residency, because we believe 2 years allows for someone who is a resident to really, in that second year, to really blossom within the leadership spaces that they are being given. We also recognize that there may be those who come into a residency who are also tagging this along with church planting. And so we want to be able to give all of the vocational training components within a 1-year time span. So though the scope is just for a 1-year cycle, it does not mean that the residency can only be for 1 year. It could also be for 2 years. So as we talk about the scope of the vocational training, I want to just briefly run through what those topics are. How we're looking at this. And these are all broken up in different ways. We have a timetable that we have begun to develop to look at in terms of what is listed week by week. But I wanted to be able to give you all a better sense of all of the things that we are looking to bring into the residents' vocational training experience. The first is their self. Very important for us to know who we are, how God has made us. And so we will be leading them through things like life maps, leadership and personality assessments, self-care rhythms, and the ministry calling conversation. A second area is strategy. We'll talk through biblical manhood, biblical womanhood, biblical diversity, evangelism training, discipleship path, leadership roles, ministry philosophy, and more. A third area is staff. We'll talk through staff structures, staff care, conflict resolution, and human resources. Another area is systems, measuring metrics, database management, salary planning, pastoral leadership, and some other topics. And each of these, again, there are other focuses that will be had in each of these, and each of these focuses, like biblical manhood and biblical womanhood, each of those would be a 1-week focus within our strategy section. But these are places that we want each of our residents to have a solid foundational understanding as they move through this. The other thing that I would mention at this point is that each of these, what we are going to be providing are really just best practices. So though we will be giving a good theological foundation to things like biblical diversity, we also will be giving them best practices of how to engage in biblical diversity conversations, best practices of how to engage with staff structures. There are lots of different types of ways to staff a church, and we will not be giving them here's the one way that you need to do it in your context. What we want to do is give them best practices so that then they engage in conversation with you about how you have chosen to implement staff structures in your local context. Again, it's all in a method of learning, of being able to grow, and allowing them to be able to see how these things are implemented on a day-to-day basis. So those are our first four. The next topics that we also will be talking about: synergy, developing guiding statements, sermon series planning, maximizing moments, mapping or ministry action plans, and others. Also structure, organizational approaches, multi-site or planting. As a church launches, or even when a church gets to that moment, how do you think through whether to multi-site or whether to church plant? Or how to do both. Church governance, and meetings with purpose. No one likes meetings where they walk out and they're like, what was that for? We want to train our church leaders well on how to have meetings that have purpose. Also spaces. What do first impression spaces look like? How do we use those type of spaces well for the community? Worship spaces, children's spaces, student spaces, and finally, it doesn't start with S, but at least our money sign is an S. But the financial side of things, developing a culture of generosity in the church, good budgeting practices, and how to build a good budget. I was never trained formally in any accounting practices, do not have a CPA degree, and nor do we think that that every pastor should have a CPA degree. But we do believe that a good church ministry leader should be able to know how to build a budget well, and how to be able to read a budget well and interpret a budget well. So we want to provide those best practices to them too. So this gives you the overall picture of the vocational training components that we will be delivering within the first year of the residency. That also will be on a kind of a cycle. So as we're talking about residencies that launch this summer, we are talking about July 15 as that start date. We also know that some of you may say, well, we're just not ready for July as our start date. That is completely fine, but stay in conversation. We want to help you be able to get to that point of launching that residency in your church. And so maybe that happens in January of 2020, or maybe it's July of 2020. But no matter when a resident starts, whether it's in July or January of 2020, they will receive all of those vocational components within their first year of being in the residency. Those details of how that looks, about how we walk through kind of that year cycle, depending on when a resident would start, whether in July or January, those are things that we can talk about later. I won't be going over those today, but I would love to engage in conversation with you at a later date about that. Another thing to note about our vocational training is the delivery and engagement method. Each of these topics will be presented to the residents just through online platforms, by videos, articles for them to read. There may be a few books here and there. There will be some books, but on some of these topics, there may be some books specific to the topic that we would have them read. We also are looking at books that would be just simply a part of the residency at large. Books like Center Church by Tim Keller, or Knowing God by J.I. Packer. Some of those books that really just serve well within not just church leadership, but pastoral leadership. So we'll be providing more details on those things later as well. Some of the delivery and engagement method also depends on where some of our educational components go, some of the master's degree partnerships that we're working on, but I'll get to that in just a moment. The third thing to note with the vocational training is then applying the learning. And this just leads right into our next topic under the what. Because to just be taught these things is one thing, but then to be able to experience them on that day-to-day basis is a whole nother thing. And so when we talk about experiential training, this is where we really are relying on you as the host place to give the resident. We're providing all of the vocational training. We're going to be delivering all of that to the resident. But what we are relying on you for is giving them an experience that is unmatched, an experience that gets them involved in ministry. And there's a few things that we would ask in that. The first is that the resident would be able to launch, sustain, and grow a ministry, that they would be given the opportunity to do that. Obviously, whether that comes to fruition is a part of their process of clarifying their call to ministry. But for you as a church to give them the space to launch, sustain, and grow a ministry. One of the ways that we want to think about residencies is it's not what we are getting from the resident, but it's what we are giving to them. And so we want to be able to give them the space to lead in that. We want to give them the opportunity to engage in being coached and into coaching others. They will be coached by you, by someone in your church, by the champion, who we will talk about here in a minute. They will be coached by that person. They will be coached in some of the pastoral staff that's there. They may be coached by some of your specific ministry leaders. Maybe your leader in children's ministry can serve the resident by coaching them in what it looks like to put together a Sunday morning children's program. But they also hopefully will be coaching others as they lead a ministry area. They will have the opportunity to pour into someone else, and it goes back to that launching, sustaining, and growing a ministry. They're having the opportunity to multiply themselves for the health of the ministry long term. A third area is that we're giving them experience leading and serving in multiple areas. Though we want them to lead a specific ministry, we also want them to experience multiple areas. We want them to spend a week in serving in the children's ministry. I'm one who believes that it would be fantastic if every resident who desires to be a lead pastor or senior pastor someday, that they would spend a month serving in the nursery. I think that experience would just give them that much deeper of an understanding and appreciation for what the volunteers experience in those places on a week in, week out basis. So as they go out and they lead in a church, they can be able to have just another moment of commonality with some volunteers. I think it'd be great for the church resident to spend time in the youth ministry, or to shadow the worship pastor for a time period, but to be able to experience multiple areas. One place in that is even when it comes to your church governance. Sometimes we can tend to go behind closed doors when it comes to board meetings and higher level conversations. But if we really want to prepare people for pastoral leadership in the church, we've got to give them good experiences, effective moments where they are seeing behind the scenes, and they're being able to sit around the table and see how healthy, constructive conversations can happen at those higher levels of leadership. And so we hope that you'd be able to find those spaces to allow them into those places where they can experience it, they can listen to it, and then they can debrief about it afterwards. They can have the time of being able to learn from it. So again, experiencing, leading, and serving in multiple areas. And then fourth, a community engagement. Whether this is through a part-time job or volunteering. One of the things that we would recommend is that the resident would be a part-time employee, and that they would then have to get a part-time job outside of the church in order to be out in the community. And whether it's a part-time job or it's just volunteering in somewhere specific, we think it's really important for them to have that experience of getting outside of the church walls in their local context. One of the things that we've talked about here, as I'm a part of a church plant here in Orlando, I'm also leading on the ground residency and internships in the local church here. And so that's why I love what I'm able to do for Converge. Not only can I talk to you about it and help to make this happen for our movement, but I'm also being able to do it myself through the local church setting. And so one of the things that we've talked about is getting our residents that we hope to have volunteering within some youth sport leagues in the area. Sports here in the Orlando area are a huge part of the community and would be a great opportunity for our residents to just be out of the church context and be serving the people. And so whatever that looks like, again, whether that's an additional part-time job that they have, or it's just that they are out volunteering somewhere specific, we think that that is a huge part of their experiential training. Now we move to the educational training components. The first thing to note with this is that it's optional. We are providing the vocational training, which you could call the educational component, but we also want to recognize that a desire or a pursuit of a master's degree may be something that is a priority for you and your church, or even for just the resident themselves. And so we want to make sure that we have those partnerships in place where it is an easy on-road to some master's degree programs. But again, the first thing to note is that it's optional. Someone does not have to be in a residency with Converge and be doing educational components. It can simply be an added-on thing to their training process. We are currently developing those partnerships. We are in conversations with multiple places and are hoping for some clear answers on that in the near future. I never know. That's kind of a weird term to say, the near future, but within the next few months. We're having a champion training, and I'm going to get to those details of what a champion is and what that training looks like. But a champion training is happening in March. We absolutely plan to have all of those details ready to tell you by then. But you can absolutely be sure that we will have those partnerships in place. So even as you're talking with residents, though you may not be able to tell them what those master's degree options are, you can absolutely let them know that they will be there. But some of the other pieces of that is, though we will be providing some of those strategic partnerships, it doesn't mean that those are the only places those can happen. We recognize that there are great seminaries and grad schools that are all across this country that provide great opportunities for students. And so you may have someone who desires to be in a residency in your church who is already in a program through a different seminary that we wouldn't have a direct partnership with. And that's completely fine. Because this is an optional component, there are many ways to make those connections. So it's a very open-handed, open book process. It's just something that we would want to be conversation about, so that we know what you all are doing and we can just be clear about how those are going to work together. But we do not anticipate any of that being a hindrance to the process of developing these residents. And the fourth thing is to, again, mention and be specific that right now we are only talking about master's degrees that would be a part of the educational training. Though we have dreams about what that might look like in the undergrad world in the future, that is not something that we are pursuing at the moment. So for the time being, these are only about master's degree programs, which of course would mean that a resident would have to have the qualifying things to be able to apply for any of these other master's degrees. All right. Now we are on to the next topic. We've talked about the what, vocational, experiential, and educational components. Now we're going to get into the how. How is this going to happen? How is this going to really begin to work in your context, on the ground in your church? The first is a champion. And we've chosen this word because this needs to be somebody who is passionate about multiplication, about church leadership, about pastoral development. It needs to be somebody who is championing this within your church and can champion this to the staff, can champion this even to your elder overseer board. And so the definition of a champion is going to be an active disciple in the local church that commits time and energy to walking with a resident through the residency experience. Excuse me. And the reason why we've defined it this way is because a champion could be a paid staff or a volunteer. Some of you may be the lone solo pastor in your church, and so you may be the one who is not only the only one who is able to lead a resident and coach them, but you may be the one who has the passion and the desire to give all of your time and energy into that. And so that's great. We want you to be able to do that. We want you to be able to pursue how the Lord has been leading you in developing others. But we also recognize that there may be some churches out there that have another staff member or even a volunteer or just a member of their church who they know is passionate about this, who would love to lead in this area. And so for us, it doesn't matter whether it's a paid staff or a volunteer. We trust you to make the best choice for your church and your context and what needs to happen. A third thing is that the champion, and I'm sorry, I just went too quickly there. Let me come back. Should just be one touch. There we go. The champion with the relationship with the resident is initiated and sustained by the champion. Though the resident is there and needs to be in conversation with the champion, the champion needs to be the one who is making sure that relationship stays strong. It communicates the encouragement to the resident. It communicates the importance to the resident. It communicates value to the resident. And so we want the champion to be the one who is leading in that relationship. Now for the things that we are really asking of the champion in this. The first is that daily a champion would be pursuing Jesus in their own life, and that they would also daily be praying for the resident and for their experience. The second is that bi-weekly, every other week, sometimes I never know how to write that. I've looked up the definition, and literally it says it can either mean twice a week or every other week. We're going to go with every other week for our definition here. But bi-weekly, that the champion would have a 90-minute meeting with the resident. And I thought about kind of describing what a meeting would look like here, but I trusted you all to know how those would effectively look. But a meeting is just an opportunity to sit and listen and ask good questions of the resident, find out what the experience is like for them, find out ways that it can be, the experience can be made better for them, challenge them, push them in ways that they need to be pushed. Again, it's all about the relationship, and we want that to be a strong experience there. And it takes on different nuances. If that resident is married, and an opportunity for maybe the champion and their spouse to really develop a relationship with this resident and their spouse. But a 90-minute meeting with the resident every other week. Monthly, we would look for the champion. If the champion is not the lead pastor or the senior pastor, then we would look for the champion to meet for 30 minutes with the lead pastor or senior pastor on a monthly basis. It's an opportunity just to update the senior pastor as to what's happening, to keep them informed of how the resident is doing, of how things are going, of how the champion is seeing things working. But if you as the lead or senior pastor are the one who's going to be pouring into the resident, then we would hope that you would have someone on your governing board, whether your elder board or your overseer board, that you'd have someone on that board that you could meet with once a month for 30 minutes, just again to update them, to kind of be in conversation with someone else about how it is going with the resident. It's a good practice for us as church leaders to be able to have someone who we are downloading information with and getting questions from, and helps us in our own coaching of others. So we would ask for that to be a monthly 30-minute meeting. And then quarterly, there'd be a 45-minute video call with the Champion Network. So as we develop this and gain residency hosts and church host locations, we will begin to develop networks, maybe geographically, maybe just by church size or church context. It really is going to depend on how we begin to see things, and that may shift as things develop. But we want the champions to all be able to have a network together as well, where you can learn from others, where you can hear how it's going for others, where you can get ideas from others about things to implement in the residency application in your church. That's a call that I would also be on just to help facilitate, but that this would be a quarterly commitment of our champions. And then finally, that there would be a semi-annually, once every 6 months, a 45-minute video call between the champion at your church and myself, for me to find out how things are going with that resident, to really dive a little deeper. It's not just a networking call, but it's a really deep dive. Because the one thing that we always want to be doing, and one of the things that I am very passionate about, is always being in reviewing mode and being in a teachable spirit, and being in an improving mindset. And so I want to make sure that I am hearing from on the ground where you're at, how is it going? Though I may be implementing it here in Orlando as well, I'm still only getting my little picture of it. And I would love to hear how it would be going in your place. So once every 6 months, there would be a 45-minute video call with me. So our next element of the how is the application and hiring process. And I want to highlight here that we are partnering with Reliant. Reliant is a company that actually shares offices with us here in our building, at the Converge building here in Orlando. They share some office space in this building with us. And they have been, for a few decades now, been leading the way in what it looks like to do support raising and managing those finances, and helping missionaries, residents, interns, church planters really come up with good action plans, and seeing great fruit and success at the fundraising part of ministry. And because we are going to be basing our residents out of a support raising practice, Reliant was an automatic partnership for us. There's an automatic trust that we have with them. Many of those folks, just because we've gotten to know them over the past few years as we've been sharing the building together. But some of those folks are part of the church plant that I'm involved in here, and have gotten to know them on a personal level as well. So I could go on and speak about how much I've appreciated getting to know them, and the trust that I have in them. But we'll give you all, as you start your residency, and once you come to Orlando for your training of what it looks like to be a champion and a residency host, you'll be able to interact with them as well, and build those relationships too. So all of this is being done in partnership with Reliant, and I'm working with them personally on the application, on the questions, and so we're working a little bit where they've had a process in place, and we are stepping into that process, and it's been working for them. They have partnerships with some great other residency programs that have already been running around this country in different churches. And so we're really leaning on them for their experience in a lot of this. But one of the things that we also recognize is that you and your church may have your own questions that you want to ask a resident. So as much as there is a resident application, and that resident application is online, it's live now, it's in Reliance website, we want to be able to acknowledge that, again, you may have your own questions for your context, and you've got your own theological questions. It makes sense for your church that you need to make sure that a resident is in line with some things theologically for you and your setting. Those are things that you will still be able to ask of a resident who is applying. We are not subverting that or taking that away from you, but it's a both and. So a resident would be completing an application through Reliance website, but they would also, if you so desired, they could complete an application or questionnaire that dealt just with your church and its context. But that is something that you and I would be talking about as we move forward. But that resident application is due on January 15th. A resident can start that now. It's live now. I actually, on the website that you see there, I would tell you to just do go.reliant.org. Don't put the word Converge on there yet. That was a hope that I had that we'd be able to do that. We may still be able to do that, but for right now, don't type the word Convergent. Just go to go.reliant.org. And a resident will be able to register in the Reliance website, and then they would be able to choose from a drop-down menu, Converge Residencies, and begin the application process. And they can do that now. The January 15th deadline is just a deadline for us so that we can support our residents well and help get them trained for support raising well and prepare, obviously, for launch in the summertime. But again, anybody can start their application as of today. A second thing within the application hiring process is that January 28th, the champion interview with the resident is due. And that's where you come in, you engaging with the resident applicant, finding out, are they going to fit within your church? Are they going to fit for your staff? Are they going to, all of those places that we look for when we hire anybody into our staff. We want you to, you are leading that. And leading in that interview process for us. So by January 28th, that those interviews would be due. Now, if we're talking about a resident who is coming from outside of your church context, someone you don't know, want to let you know we're not trying to push things too fast or force you into a decision that you're not ready to make. Let's just be in conversation about that. What I do know and what our hope is for the future is that most of the time our residents will be people who we have raised up from within. So from within your local church, it's somebody who you've already gotten to know over the past few years. It's somebody who's already been a part of your church, who you've seen that they have been called to ministry, and you are helping to push them towards that next step of vocational ministry. And so hopefully this interview process that would happen in the future would be something that would not need to be as intense, just because you've gotten to know them pretty well. But these dates are just guidelines for us as we step forward towards the summer. But please know that there is an open-handedness in this, and we'll be in touch about how to do that well if a resident is coming to you from outside of your church. Another date then is that March 4th. The goal right now for Reliant and Converge is that all of our hiring decisions in residencies would be completed by March 4th, because by March 28th, there is a training here in Orlando for the residents. Those who will be starting residencies this summer are going to have a training March 28th through 31 here in Orlando. It will be with Reliant. Reliant will lead that whole process of training them, of helping them to get their support based going to help them brainstorm the names, to help them communicate well, to help them have their strategy and their plans, to help them plan out and plot out what does it look like April, May, June, and July for them to continue towards raising that support as they step forward. And then July 15th, residencies begin. So then there's the support raising side. Again, we've mentioned it's going to be supported, managed, and maintained by Reliant. That means that you as a church, you don't need to worry about the financial side of that. You don't have to worry about the taxes. You don't have to worry about the training that goes along with that. All of those things will be held by Reliant. So there is a level where there's a partnership of an employment partnership. Legally, a resident is going to be employed by Reliant because that's where their paycheck will come from. But they will be employed by you in their performance and in their experience. And so we have a bit where there's an open-handedness in that. Reliant has already committed that they're not making decisions on firing someone if something were to happen. You as a local church are leading that conversation for us, but it's a conversation. It's something that we hope that we would all be a part of and at least knowledgeable of, if that were to ever come down the road. Again, we mentioned March 28th through 31 is when the training happens for residents here in Orlando. And so the next big question is salary. What are we talking about? Well, we have two tiers that we're looking at. And again, this is working with Reliant and their best practices. If you and your church decide that a resident is going to be part-time, then you can either go in at a part-time of $15,000 a year or $20,000 a year. And if you and your church say, you know what, we want them to be a full-time, we want this to be a full-time residency, then you choose between either a $30,000 per year salary or $40,000 per year salary. And the reason we have those different tiers is kind of because of the different contexts and even pay structures that different churches have based on your location, based on where you are, whether you're in a suburban setting or urban or rural, or whether you're in the Bay Area in California or northern Iowa. Those cost of livings may be different, and so your pay scales are different for your churches. So out of respect for what may be true in your context, we have some different tiers that are available in that. But that's something that you would choose. Some of you have already completed the church host application for us for Converge. I'm going to be back in touch with you about where you think that may be for you. But those of you who haven't completed that yet, that will be a part of the application. We'll be looking for you to say, hey, we're thinking that this is a part-time role at $20,000 a year. Now, please know that these levels are just salary, because another factor in this that will go on top, and this is just a part of the support raising goal that a resident will have. This is for your information so you know that there is a full support goal that includes additional factors like cost of living, insurance, taxes, educational components. Because if someone is full-time, then they are required to buy into Reliant's health insurance plan. If they're part-time, that is not a requirement. And so those factors will make a difference on the actual total support goal that someone would have to raise. The last note to make on the support raising is that Reliant's goal and Converge's goal is that every resident would have 80% raise support, either in one-time gifts or in monthly promised gifts by their start date. So if someone were to start July 15, we hope that they would have an 80%, their 80% of their salary would be reached. Or if maybe you decide you want to start this next January, well, by that start date, we hope that there would be, our goal is 80% of their total support needed would be raised by then. So our final topic that I'm kind of move through, just because of our time and respect of some question and answer time. But your church's readiness. There's a couple of things to consider. The first is your church committed to multiplying leadership? Is your church committed to the time and the effort that it takes to multiply leadership, to show that example to the rest of the church body? Is your church committed to giving away leadership? One of the questions that I have asked a few people here and there is they've said, well, I'm really passionate about developing a lead pastor. And I said, well, that's great. How many Sundays a year are you willing to give up to let them preach, to let them experience, to let them even maybe make a mistake in their preaching, and they have to go through the experience of how to handle that mistake? And sometimes that can feel a little bristly because when we the guys who like to preach and speak, it's hard to give up those moments sometimes. But we have to be committed to giving away leadership in moments. Another one is that your church's readiness. Do you have a champion? Whether it's you, whether it's someone on your staff, whether you immediately think of a volunteer, somebody who's committed to your church, committed to leadership development, and you're like, that person could do this. Are you ready to provide that champion? And finally, to commit some finances. We would encourage that you would send your resident to any Converge gatherings, and especially your district gatherings. Get them experience in their own networking with other Converge churches. Some local ministry expenses, so as they are engaging with your church body, that they're able to take a volunteer out for coffee, that they're able to meet somebody out in the community. So just some reimbursed expenses out of part of their residency with you. That maybe if your church does missions trips, you would send them on a mission trip. And that would just be a built-in thing that you enhance their experience by sending them on that trip in a leadership capacity. And also, if they need a computer or a laptop, that you would provide that for them. All right, finally, some next steps. So what is this? What do you need to do next? Debrief with someone and pray. That's always my first thing. Take the information, let it settle, but talk with somebody in your church who maybe you've been a part of our first webinar, or you've at least caught up to this point. Debrief with somebody and pray. How is God leading us? What is he wanting for our next steps to be when it comes to residencies and pastoral and leadership development? Another thing you can do is just talk with me. That is my direct office phone number, and you can even text me at that number, and I'll get it on my phone. 407-563-6070. I desire to talk with you if you're just processing and trying to figure out what to do and how to take next steps. I'm here to help. I'm here to support. I'm here to encourage. I'm here to just ask questions that can help you make a good decision. So please engage with me in that. You can complete the church host application. You know that you're ready to go. Go complete that church host application. And if you don't have that link, we will make sure to put that in our email that we send later today. If you have potential residents, if you have some people in mind, you've got people you've already been talking with, have them go ahead and start the resident application process. Because there's also some references that they need to send out to other people that you've got to get back. So there's a little bit of a time period with that. But have them start that resident application process. Let's get some people into the pipeline. One other thing is mark down March 26th through 27. We are having champion training here in Orlando, and that time period works well. If you may recognize that time period, that week, March 26 and 27 is when we desire for the champion in all of our local churches that are hosting residencies starting this summer. We want that champion to come to Orlando for a more intensive training time with us. Also, then March 28 through 31 is when the residents will all be here for their support raising training. So it becomes a great week of residency focus training moments for us here at Converge. And finally, talk to another Converge church about residencies. Maybe they haven't even thought about it, and I'm not looking for you to go out and recruit other churches, but it's just a matter of talking with another Converge church, finding out what somebody else is doing, telling them what you're hearing here and how the pastor at that church may interact and think about residencies within the context that they're in. Again, it's another opportunity just for networking and connecting with people. So there you go. That is the presentation for today. So you have my email address right there on that page, caleb.smith@converge.org. You also, there's my phone number, and I'll go back to my email here in just a second, 407-563-6070. All right, I'm going to open up the Q&A piece of this and see if there are any questions here. The first one is just, I appreciate it. He just says sweet. So thanks so much for that. The next one question. I have a resident for 5 months. Do you think he would be prepared in enough time to replant a church? If I'm being honest, I'm not quite sure what that question is asking. Maybe that's my own short-sightedness on understanding the question. So I'm not sure if you're asking about having a resident. You've got somebody right now who's been in it for 5 months. Maybe you're asking that if he's in it for 5 months, would that be enough time that they'd be ready to go into church planting? Um, Whether that's your question or not, let me just mention our church planting connection here. We see residencies being effective with church planting in a couple of ways. One, it can serve as a place where if someone comes through the church planting assessment centers with Converge, that if they are given any type of flags, we have a process where we green light them or yellow light or red light them. Just because they receive a yellow light or red light does not mean that we're saying that they are not fit for church planting or church leadership per se. But a residency becomes a great opportunity to funnel them right into something that can help them continue down the pathway of clarifying their call to ministry. But we also see residencies as a place where someone may come into a residency, and while they're in the residency, they still are pursuing church planting, and they're still going through the church planting assessment center. So it's not an either or. It's a tied-in partnership of how we want to continue to pursue church planting through our residencies. The next question on here, could you provide a list of all of the church systems essential to pastoring planting? Which systems will the education and experience cover? What systems need to be covered by the church champion on their own with the resident? With the champion specifically, what we're looking for the champion is not that they are doing any of the vocational or educational training pieces. The vocational, educational components are all coming from us as Converge or are coming from the seminary or grad school. The champion is just there to keep the resident accountable, to just press in with them and say, well, what have you been learning about? Tell me what you've been learning. Tell me how you think that applies for our church and our context, for our culture. How do you think that applies for our mission and how we're pursuing ministry here? The champion is just again, somebody who is just helping to interact with the resident along those lines. The systems that the educational components will cover, again, we're still developing those. But as we move forward, back to those earlier slides, maybe this question comes, maybe you weren't there for those earlier slides, but there's an overview with the slides that you'll get here in an email in a little bit. It lists out a lot of those systems and those things that we're looking to cover on the vocational training side. How many resident churches are you looking for? That's a great question. There are a lot of things that we are doing here at Converge, a lot of initiatives that we're pursuing. And it really is about how God has just been working here, how he's been pressing us towards being a leading voice within the American church when it comes to church strengthening and church planting, but also how he's been leading us to be a voice within the international missions world. And so with that, there's a lot of new positions that have started here in our office here in Orlando, mine being one of them. I just started on August 1st. And so but some of these, especially residency is a great example. It's not something that just all of a sudden kind of just happened in somebody's mind and they said, well, let's just hire somebody and let's get this thing going. This has been an ongoing process. Our president, Scott Rideout, and our executive director of church planting, Lee Stevenson, both of those guys have been working for years on bringing together a lot of the research and the focuses that would need to be a part of a residency. They've been seeing residency as the wave of the future in terms of church training and church developing the leaders and the pastoral leaders for the future. They've been seeing this as the wave and the way in which this is moving. And they saw that a long time ago. And so we're kind of riding their coattails, but we also now are just putting our feet on the ground and we're starting to move. So as we do that, as we take all of that information, I mean, if I'm being honest, I think I've read over about 600 pages that both Scott and Lee put together over their past few years. I spent all of August and September reading all of that. But now we're just ready. We're ready to get going. So my goal for this summer is at least 20 churches that are ready to launch residencies. Our goal for 10 years is that we in 10 years would have 100 strong, effective churches that are hosting Converge residency programs. Again, whether that's one resident in your church, that's a residency, or whether you're a church that can support 5 residents, that's a residency program. But that there would be 100 locations that we would be effective in by 10 years down the road. So that's how we're looking to move this. That's the vision that we're pursuing. Why is Converge utilizing Reliant rather than just Process themselves? Yeah, a good question. Really, it's because Reliant brings a lot of experience across the board on that support raising side and on the financial management side. That though we may have people who could do that, we also know that would be a little more of a well, I'll say it this way. We're not sure if we have the margin to really lean into that, especially as we look to build this out. Reliant is very much used to managing all of these different folks in their different situations and their different scenarios. No matter where they're at, they're used to doing this with multiple different churches. They're used to all of the different contexts and cost of living places. They're used to what this looks like in different states based on the rules and regulations that are in those states. And so we really want to lean into the experience that they have. It also is an opportunity, as you may see from most of our emails that come from Converge. We all have that nice tagline of better together. And it's not just something where we say, hey, if you're in Converge, that's great because we're better together within Converge, though that is true. We also believe that we're just better together as a part of the body of Christ. So if somebody can do something just a little bit better within a certain area, then we want to lean into that. And that's one of the places that Reliant can really help us because they've been doing this for residency and internship programs around the country. There's a lot of experience that they bring to the table in that. So we want to lean in. We want to lean into that well. What compensation does Reliant receive for managing this? Yeah, a great question. There is a fee, a percentage fee that they receive as a part of this, but that's not something that the local church is paying for, and that's not something that Converge is paying for. That is something that is built into the support raising goal that the resident is pursuing. And that's a general practice that Reliant has for all of their residencies across the country. Again, they manage residency systems in some of the largest churches in the United States, and this is just a standard practice. So we want to be able to value them and their work, and provide that as a continued partnership with them. So that's the compensation piece of that. Again, not something that we pay for or that the local church pays for, but something that's built into the support. Does the local church contribute to the $15,000 or $20,000 for the part-time? No, we desire for the resident. We want the resident to experience support raising. It is a faith step. A little window into my life. I'm doing my support raising as a part of this church plant that I'm a part of here in Orlando. I do receive compensation from Converge for the role that I have, but that is not my full-time job. I also have a part-time job with the local church, and that part I am doing my own support raising for. And so for any of you who have done support raising, you know that engaging in that is a faith step, a great faith step. And so we desire for the residents to experience that as well. We also think that it will give them a good practice, especially for those that move towards the church planning phase. It gives them a great practice towards that. We do want you to know, though, that as we move towards the church planning side of that, we're going to be very careful about not taxing our residents, about not taxing, maybe the wrong word to use in a financial conversation, but not spending their resources so much to where they don't have anything to draw from as they move into church planning. We're going to be really good about that. We've been talking with Reliant about that, and that's a priority that we have. We want to launch any church planter well, because they will be doing support raising as they pursue a church plant. So no, the church does not contribute anything, and this is a value that we have as Converge to you, the local church, that we don't want this to be a burden on you, that you've got to somehow fit this salary, whether part-time or full-time, into your budget. It's something that you can be able to implement. though we do have those other financial commitments that we spoke of earlier. And if you missed that part, then you'll see that when the link is sent to you later. Um, well, let me say it's 2:58, and I want to respect y'all's time. A lot more questions have come in, and I appreciate those. I'm kind of in this moment. I'm asking my tech guys here in the room. Do we have the option of saving these questions? Um, yes, we do have that opportunity. So we're going to be taking all of your questions down because I don't want to miss any of these. And a lot of them, as I'm looking through these, a lot of these are having to do with the financial side. Because I know as you start thinking about how do we do this and how do we make this happen, those become those more important questions. Comes down, especially if you're like me. I served as an executive pastor for 4 years. I just want to know what's the bottom line. So if you missed any part of the presentation earlier, again, links are going to be sent, an email is going to be sent that's going to have that. But I'm going to be going back through these questions, and as much as I can, be getting in touch with you personally to let you know. I'll probably even go through and create some kind of a frequently asked question thing that I'll email out as well to everybody, just so you can see what other people are asking and what the answers to those questions were. But I appreciate y'all's time. Thank you for engaging in this. Thanks for being passionate about leadership development and pastoral development. You may know already, hey, we are not ready for this. My church is not ready for this. This is 2 years out for us at least. That doesn't mean that we need to end our conversation here. Let's stay in touch. Let's stay in communication, because I want to help you get to that point. I want to help you be able to take the right steps so that you can be a place that is multiplying people and sending people out into the world of vocational ministry, whether they are sent back into your local church or whether you send them around the world. We want to be here to support you and encourage you in that. So thanks for the time. And again, you'll receive all of our links in an email later today, and I look forward to connecting with each of you over the next month.